So there's this concept I've always been super interested in, just like blurring the lines between what fiction is and what nonfiction is. We kind of talked about this a little bit, almost in more of an abstract form, or more of like a divorced form when we're talking about genre, the power of genre. And I think that part of that's more interesting than just the power of genre to tell us things about ourselves that we can't quite see in front of us, is to tell us things about ourselves that we've been through or could very well go through in the modern day, in the present reality, that we didn't see. I think on first examination, this might sound basically exactly the same as the other Paint and Talk I did, but I mean it more in this sense, right? I think Star Wars is a great example of it. Star Wars is famously about the Vietnam War, right? The original Star Wars, at least. I think the newer ones are not about, Rogue One definitely has some of that in. I'm not the biggest Star Wars fan. I'm more of a Star Trek guy, which I know I will probably get a lot of flack for, but, listen, guys, I'm never going to apologize for that. Star Trek's much better, but either way, veering off track here right away, we can say that the original Star Wars is 100% about the Vietnam War. George Lucas has said this, right? In an interview, the interview said something like, the rebels in Star Wars resemble a resistance group, not too different from, and, we named a couple of the resistance groups at the time. I don't know if I can really say them. I might get demonetized. But then George Lucas says very transparently, when I was writing Star Wars, they were called the Viet Cong, right? And I think this says a lot. George Lucas was not writing it so much in the middle of it. It was still definitely very prescient when it was happening, but Star Wars as an entity definitely exists almost after the fact, right? It's sort of a reflection on it. I would be willing to, and this is not something that I think many people view Star Wars as being, but I am really okay with viewing Star Wars from the lens, especially the first one in specific, of being almost like the defining art piece of that, right? Oftentimes, I think people have a tendency when looking back at some sort of social thing that happened, in this case it being the Vietnam protests, to make the most significant art piece of the time something very direct. I don't think it'd be uncommon to choose like a poem that's directly about the conflict or something. I think it's an interesting, I see the value in that for sure, it's, especially when it's something as dense of a subject like that. I do think there's definitely a value in making it something super direct, super literal, but I also think it's interesting how when you look back at these periods, there is always something that was culturally super significant that maybe was not perceived as being about the thing it was really about. Star Wars is a great example of that, right? To this day, you'll see the best guys ever talking about how Star Wars is not political, which is hilarious considering its history. Again, this in itself is not the point. The point is what Star Wars actually does, right? Star Wars is a work of fiction, obviously. I hope that we can all agree on that. Star Wars is 100% a work of fiction, but the events in it definitely are true, right? Not in the sense that they actually happened, but in the sense that they tell us a true story. Those events did happen when you abstract it, right? In this sense, I don't think it's too far off to call Star Wars almost an abstract painting of Vietnam, right? In a super abstract sense. This is where actually I think a big failing of mine personally for Star Wars comes in, is like, I think that the way it ends tells us like kind of a weird, like it almost loses its own allegory by the end of it, in my opinion at least, I think it maybe expanded itself too much where it could have been a really tight, great thing, but that's totally besides the point. The events, at least in episode 1 of Star Wars, are totally true. They tell us a lot of truth. This also reminds me of a quote about the second Steve Jobs movie, not the first one with, oh my god, who played him in that first one? Ashton Kutcher, I believe, not that one, but the one with Magneto. Magneto plays Steve Jobs. Why can't not Michael Phelps, Michael Fassbender, that's it. The second Steve Jobs movie is completely fictional, right? It's about Steve Jobs, the guy who was real, indeed a real guy. Thanks for the phones, I'm recording on them right now. But this movie itself, none of the events actually happened in it, right? It's about Steve Jobs at 3 different eras, one in the 80s, one in the 90s, and one set in the 2000s, before 3 different product launches, his famous things where he had the black turtleneck on, he was like, one more thing, like that thing, right? Before 3 of those, right? and just him walking around having encounters with the same general group of people, right? He'll meet with like Wozniak, he'll meet with like his daughter. It's been a while since I've seen the movie, but people that were important to him in his life. And through this, it does tell the story of Steve Jobs. You know, it talks about the computer he's talking about. It shows off how much of a perfectionist he is, and you know, so on and so on. It tells a little bit about Next Computers. Now they're like, oh, they're buying back the UI. Like, they do put those things in there. So if you're familiar with the full story of him, you do get a Steve Jobs movie out of it, but the movie itself didn't happen. None of it happened, right? It's almost as if you took the Steve Jobs book, cut it up, and make a collage out of the pieces of it, right? And I think, I've always thought this was a super interesting move on the part of the director, right? Great movie, totally recommend it. If you guys are at all interested in it, totally recommend it. It's an amazing movie. I always thought this was an interesting choice though, because like, it just seems like a really risky move. Like, it seems almost like a surefire way to disappoint an audience. Somebody like Steve Jobs, I mean, he has a lot of fans, he has a lot of people that really like him. He's a renowned figure. His story is one that's always repeated. You know, I mean, I feel like everyone knows a thing or two about him because he's always like, oh, he dropped out of college, you know. He's like the father of the whole Silicon Valley thing that everyone loves now. I mean, you know, he was the first guy to really do that whole thing. So I think, like, if I'm a director making this, I think it's a really strange move, right? I think it's almost like so many people are gonna be mad, because when you're making a biopic, they want something direct. They want something that's very much like, and then the Beatles went on the show, and everybody was like, man, these guys are great. You know, that's what people want in a biopic. But I think that Steve Wozniak, Steve Jobs, the guy who also founded Apple with Steve Jobs, thanks for the phone too, he said something about it after the fact that I thought was so interesting. He said, none of it happened, but all of it was true. And I think that that's exactly what I'm trying to get at here. And I think probably, if I'm willing to bet here, I think that's what the director of this movie understood, whose name escapes me at the moment. I'm sorry about that. I'm willing to bet that's what he understood about fiction and nonfiction that maybe audiences weren't seeing yet. I know I wasn't seeing it until I really thought about this issue. Is there a difference between the reality of what actually happened and the truth? We can all agree yes, right? We all have our own interpretation of reality. We all have our own interpretation of truth. These things will often conflict, right? Your brain is imperfect at memory. So in reality, like, there's nothing that actually you know for a fact happened 100%. You have memories, but like, there's no way to be like, this is exactly point A to B to C. If you ask Steve Wozniak, tell me the story of you and Jobs over there, he would not be able to tell you the story 100%. There's no way he could tell you 100% accurately. It was all the way back in the 80s. Like, he'd have some details messed up, you know. The memory is an imperfect thing. So I think this begs the question, when you get to a story being imperfect, what is more important? The events in the order that they happened, or the truth? One might assume those two things are the same, but I think they could be very different. I think that truth is more something that has a suggestion of being almost objective, right? An eye looking from above is more so the truth, whereas eyes looking like I am on the floor here are going to be memories. And I think that is what's at the center of this. So I do think we can make a distinction between the events that unfolded and the truth, right? Beyond that, I think then we can move to the question, what is the difference between an imperfect series of events and skewed events, abstracted events? What's the difference between somebody misremembering maybe their own experience of seeing the Vietnam War on the news and Star Wars? Obviously, there's a huge difference. When these things happen, this is there's a huge difference between these things, like on a very material level, objectively, right? I'm not going to sit here and think my way into just being a dumb guy of like, there's no real difference here. However, I do think that there's an argument to be made that there's a thinner line between fiction and nonfiction than we originally assumed. And I think that this line is getting so thin at this point, to the point where it might not even exist, right? I think it's already a blurrier line than we want to think. I think we want to assume that we have like semi-good memories and like the things that we remembered are reality, and they probably are most of the time. Like, I'm willing to bet, you know, all my memories are like, they seem like they happened to me. They seem like they're 100% accurate, even though they probably aren't. So I'm willing to bet that this line was already blurrier than we were willing to say. I do think in this modern age, I think I'm not the first guy to say this. This is like a whole philosopher thing that they say, that we're in a post-truth world. And I think with this might come the idea that perception is going to be reality. Reality is what happened, or just the consensus of what's going on, right? When everybody's perceptions are flawed, what is more important? Everybody's perception of what's going on or the truth? I mean, there are multiple examples in modern day daily life of this where this is a very prescient question, right? There are opinions that people have that are at 1,000,000% odds with the actual reality in front of them. But they have these opinions anyways, and they'll die on a hill they have them. They will literally die for these opinions. We all know some of the subjects that we can think of even in our own lives, right? Think of people in your life, right? I'm willing to bet we all have one or two. With that, it's a very prescient question. What's more important? The reality of what's going on or the truth of the situation? And if truth is what you deem to be more important, I don't think this is a question I should even attempt to answer, because I don't think I'm equipped to answer this question. I think this is an interesting observation and one that I generally agree with as I've looked around the world, and I feel like it doesn't quite make as much sense. It's an observation I've come to, right? This is something I do believe, but I don't think I'm at any odd equipped, and I more want to pose the question of what is more important, the reality or the truth of the situation? If you say that it's perceived reality, rather, I should make that distinction. Perceived reality or the truth of the situation. If you say it's truth of the situation, what are you willing to do to make people believe in this truth again, right? When we're in this space. If you think that perceived reality is more important, then do you believe a lie if you know it's a lie but everybody else perceives it? Or is reality just now a democratic vote of what do the most people believe? That's what's going to become true. The winners have always written history. Maybe this is just a new age where, since everything is so out there, everything's so democratized with the internet, that we write our own realities too, not just the past. I don't know. I feel that I will say, once again, I'll say I agree with this observation. This is something I've been thinking about for a little bit now. I don't know if I've done the best job explaining it here, so my apologies there. I always, disappoint myself a little bit when I bite off something bigger with one of these topics, and I won't try that here today. So hopefully this made some sense. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this a little bit. This is the painting, new color palette, very much a watermelon. I mean, this is a watermelon through and through. So shout out watermelons, that's great. And besides that, until next time, guys, gals, and pals, my name is Max Zeiss. This has been Paint Talk episode 198. We're getting so close to 200. I'm here every morning, painting and talking with you all. Almost got me there, I almost forgot.